So are you holding on to the shore? Have you ever had the courage to let go of your good to receive your greater yet to be? My talk today is metaphysics and morality. Now, besides the really cool alliteration of those two words together in a sentence, we're going to be talking about religious science as an organization. Religious science is the organization. Science of mind is the text and philosophy that we teach from. Centers for Spiritual Living is our current name of how we forward face into the world. So I want to look at how we got started, what was happening then, and where we are today, and maybe even lift the veil a little bit on where we might be going. Where we might be going. It's said that Phineas Parkhurst Quimby is the father of New Thought, and he was the first to recognize the influence of our thoughts on our environment. Now, I happen to think this goes back a little further than him. I think it goes back before recorded history, probably, because these are truth teachings, right? And we see them recorded in many of the ancient philosophers of Greece. Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, Aristotle, right? A lot of what they were seeing the impact of thoughts on environment, and they were amazingly creative and intelligent in what they were able to do at that time in history. So the New Thought movement as we know it has been influenced, though, by Quimby and his mesmerism techniques, and also by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we studied a couple of months ago, and his influence on Ernest Holmes. Judge Thomas Troward was an English citizen who served in the court in India and was exposed to Eastern traditions and was able to then bring that to the world in his teaching. And then Emma Curtis Hopkins was a little bit later on. She came out of the Christian Science movement with Mary Baker Eddy. And then all of these people were influences on the founders of the New Thought movement that we know today. We have unity churches. Familiar with unity? Unity is Myrtle and Charles Fillmore. They were the founders. And then we also have divine science. Divine science has dwindled down to just a very few centers now, but it was founded by Melinda Kramer. Ernest Holmes was actually an ordained divine science minister. So that's where he kind of started. He also was with Christian Science for a while because he liked the way they prayed. But they wouldn't let him pray in public. And he said, well, that's not for me because I like to pray in public. So he left there, did his own thing. But then, of course, our own religious science with Ernest Holmes founding that. Now, you can see by this slide, sometime between 1888, 1899, and 1926 is when all of this came into being. Why then? Why then? Why at that particular time in history did three organizations emerge with this new thought idea? Anybody around 1999, 2000? Most of us in this room, I think, were. There's a couple back there that may not have been, little guys. But most of us were probably around at that time and remember what was happening. There wasn't an IT person in the world that wasn't at their desk that night, was there? Because we didn't know what was going to happen. There was a lot of fear and concern around what might occur that evening. And turned out to be okay, right? But we didn't know. But there was also enthusiasm and excitement about turn of the century. There was even a song, wasn't there? Party like it's 1999. So I can, human nature is human nature. I can imagine perhaps what 1899 to 1900 may have been also in society. That sense of anticipation of the new century coming, and also not knowing maybe what's going to happen next. So let's look at what was happening with society and some trends at that point. There was a movement that was very popular between 1840 and 1920. Now, if you remember, the Civil War in this country was around 1865. Yeah, ended in around 65. So now we've got about 20 some years later, spiritualism becomes a big social and religious movement. Yeah, isn't that great? Oops, sorry. Sorry, I wake y'all up. Around its high point, it had about 8 million followers in the US and Europe. And the numbers, though, began to drop in the late 1800s, 1880s, because they lost credibility because of accusations of fraud of many of the mediums. She doesn't look fraudulent, does she? No. Excuse me. We'll have a moment here, but then we'll be fine. The other thing that was happening was seances. Anybody have ever been in, have done, played with seance? Yeah. We used to do it as kids all the time. You'd put your hands under the table and you'd move the table and scare your brothers and sisters. Yeah, but they were very popular. But in 1887, University of Pennsylvania issued a report that tainted their credibility. Also saying, I can't talk and chew that, but thank you. It published an exposure of fraud and showmanship among the seance leaders. And anybody having a Ouija board growing up? That's the original 1890. And it was used in spiritualism to support faster communication with the dead, with the spirits. Sorry, let's turn this off for a minute and use this. There we go. And so, unfortunately, this industry in general was sort of filled with a lot of charlatans. But if you think about 80 million member or 8 million members, it's a pretty big organization that people wanted to get involved with to capture more money, right? So a lot of charlatans began to come out in that. So hold that in mind. And then let's think about medicine. Medical treatments, late 1800s, turn of the century 1900s. You couldn't just pop in for a CT scan, right? Yeah, not so much. We didn't have antibiotics. I mean, all sorts of things that were a problem, right? And so these are some of the medical instruments of the day. Oh boy, looks like farm equipment, doesn't it? Yeah. And the ether machine over here, I had a little procedure back in the summer, and I was talking to the anesthesiologist about ether when I was 7 years old. I guess I got my tonsils taken out, and they gave me ether. Watch for the butterflies, they said, right? And I was telling him that story, and he goes, that stuff was so explosive. We had to get it out of the operating rooms. It kept catching them on fire. I was like, really? So when I saw this, I thought, wow, that's kind of that's kind of the contraption. So we've come a long way. But back then, what was happening is that surgery was becoming more safe, but it was also becoming more risky because the progress they were making was done through experimentation. Oh, let's try this. If the patient lives, we'll do it again. If they don't, well, we won't do that again. Right? So it was a little iffy to be involved in the medicine world. All right. And the third thing that was happening, the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. Okay. So we have a lot of stuff going on now. World's Fair, look how big that is. Isn't that amazing? World's Fairs draw huge crowds, millions of people from all over the world come to see what's happening at the World Fair, because that's where things like electricity and light bulbs got revealed. That's where, all the new products are shown. That's where all of the new inventions and things are shown, is at this World's Fair. People come together. So that was happening. And at the same time those World's Fairs happen, there are organizations that will have their conferences, we might call them. At that time, they were called congresses or parliaments, and their constituents would get kind of two for one. They could come to the convention, but then they can also go to the fair. So it was like a win-win. And maybe people that were planning to travel to the fair could also check out what was happening in some of these congresses or conventions. So 1893 was the first first ever World Parliament of Religions. The World Parliament of Religions. Now, I had the fortune to attend the 2012, 11 Parliament of World Religions that was held in Utah, Salt Lake City, I believe. And it was quite fascinating. All of the world's faith traditions were represented there. And you could sit in on speakers in any faith tradition and displays of their materials and works and so forth. And I was able to participate in a luncheon prepared by and served by the Sikh community. I mean, it was just really delightful to meet so many different people from so many different faith traditions around the world. So this was happening in 1893, and this was the first large-scale introduction to America of Eastern religions, of European religions, things we were not familiar with, because we were very much, a Christian-based country, because we had come over here for religious freedom, right? And so that was happening, and now all of a sudden, things were opening up. It's like, oh, people believe different things. There are other texts, sacred texts out there that people just were not familiar with. So all of that's happening. So we mix all those things together, out pops new thought. Out pops new thought. The new thought teachings historically started as healing centers. Ernest Holmes and his brother actually operated a sanatorium in Los Angeles because people didn't want to go to the doctor, right? It's like, was there an alternative to this? I'm not going to just pop in the doctor's office or jump on the operating table. So affirmative prayer with Christian Science and the New Thought communities, became a solution for folks who were struggling. So it became a healing teacher. Now, an interesting thing about Ernest Holmes is he's the founder of Religious Science Centers for Spiritual Living, wrote Science of Mind. He actually explored all of those spiritualism methods. He went to the seances, he went to the palm readers, he did all of those things. And when he came out of all of it, he said, I cannot find any proof that this is working. He remains skeptical about that. And I think that's why in our teaching, we don't have a lot of props that we use, so to speak. We do rituals, we'll do saging, and we have stones that we play with sometimes, and we wear our stoles, and, we have some ritual that we do. But when it comes to our teaching, our affirmative prayer, we don't need anything but ourselves, right? We don't even have to be in the presence of the person we're praying for, because we all live and move and have our being within the one mind. We're all connected in consciousness. So that's all we need. And that was his belief and what he understood after all the study and things that he had done. It's all one. I don't need a magic wand. I've got my mind, and the mind of God I share. So he had a very strong upbringing in biblical teaching. That's how he was raised. But as he began to sprinkle in all these other things, he began to see a different truth in the teachings of Jesus. He began to see metaphysically. Metaphysically means beyond the physical. So, not just reading the words and what the words mean by definition, but reading beyond the words, right? And interpreting on the metaphysical plane the higher truth of these messages that have lasted through the centuries. When I was in ministerial school, I had 2 Bible classes, and I had to read the Bible cover to cover. And yeah, I kept going, why has this lasted so long? Why has this lasted so long? Because when you listen or read it, the words, it's like this. For me, I really had to go into the metaphysical messages of it to find that truth that Jesus is trying to teach. And he was teaching that 2,000 plus years ago, and we're still finding meaning in it today. So that's the beauty and the truth of the message. That's the beauty and the truth. So Ernest's teaching is that when we learn to comply with these universal truths, these universal laws, and act with them, in alignment with them, rather than resisting them, life flows. Life works better. I think coming out of all that he did before founding Science of Mind in 1926. So he was the last one, the youngest, if you will, of that group. And I think because he saw all of those things that we talked about, he had a powerful point of view in this teaching. And we still teach it to our practitioners, and we teach it in all of our affirmative prayer classes. Ernest didn't want to be associated with the charlatans. Remember, we talked about all the charlatans that were in spiritualism stuff. He didn't want to be associated with that in any way, shape, or form. So in our teaching, he says, we are free to give full and complete expression to every capacity we possess, provided this freedom harms no one and hurts no thing. We can have anything we want as long as we harm no one and hurt no thing. This is Holmes' statement about morality in metaphysics. He didn't want us going down a dark path with this teaching. He didn't want the charlatans and so forth. This is why we don't lay hands on physically. We don't have to physically touch the spot where it hurts to make it go away. We simply do our prayer work in mind. Ernest looked at this as a powerful teaching, recognizing the power within it as experienced by him in his own life. And so he had an attitude of do no harm. Now, you may recognize that as the Hippocratic Oath that many physicians take. Do no harm. Because there is power in this mind. And some people do, we see it all the time, people that you make decisions that are more negative and less helpful to the planet that maybe do harm. And so he didn't want to be associated with that. His point is that our work is done in consciousness. So what does all this mean to us today? What does all this mean to us today? Where are we today? Who is religious science today? Who is Centers for Spiritual Living today? Most of us in our centers teach Ernest Holmes' Science of Mind still. We also teach those who came before. We had our whole series on Emerson recently. We also teach those who came after. Anybody heard of Louise Hay? Yeah, Louise Hay was one of our ministers. Did you know that? Yeah, Louise was a minister with us before she started her publishing company. Wayne Dyer was very involved in many of our centers and our teaching. And also, of course, Deepak Chopra has been around our centers and things for many, many, many years. So we teach those who have come after and those that came before, as well as Ernest Holmes. One of the things that he used to always say is that this organization must remain open at the top. And sometimes that's interpreted that our leadership needs to keep an open mind. And that's true, we do. And I think he was talking about our consciousness remaining open. Because Ernest always talked about that upward spiral, that we're an upward spiral of expansion forever and ever and ever, which is why he didn't really believe in reincarnation. Why do I want to go back to this physical, limited form when I'm taking all this expansion, and my expansion in death is just a bigger expansion into something more? I don't want to come back into human existence. I'm taking the more. I don't know what it is, but I'm taking the more. And so I think that's what he was talking about when he said, open at the top, keep expanding forever, keep expanding forever. He knew in his own lifetime, he was fascinated by science of mind, right? He was fascinated by it. And so I think he realized that science was going to keep growing and expanding, and that our teaching probably could change based on that. So that's where I think we are headed as an organization. Many in religious science right now think that we should become more outward focused on social justice issues. And there are others that say change begins from within. So we've got a lot of conversation going on in our movement right now about these two ideas. It was Gandhi who said we must first become the change we wish to see. I fall into the latter camp. I'm one of the ones that says change happens within. When we change, the world will change. That's my belief. We do our work in the world. We do our work in the world, but the inner work that we do is what's most critical to changing our world. If each and every member of a CSL community lived his life, her life, gaining control of our thoughts, our actions, our minds, being kind to everyone all the time, our thoughts, our actions, our interactions. Meditation every day. No pass. Meditation every day becomes part of who we are. And we pray without ceasing, meaning that we approach life with a prayerful attitude always, knowing our oneness and our wholeness. It's as if we live in those first two steps of treatment. God is all there is, and I am one with that. And therefore, all of my life and all of my interactions are that. That's praying without ceasing. If every member of all of our communities did that, we would change the world. We would see it change before us. For those of you that have a daily spiritual practice, is your life better than it was before you started doing that stuff? Yeah. You know, with so many people in America, I'll just say, I'm assuming around the world, not having an active spiritual community in which to connect, to go, and to experience that support system. I don't know about you, but growing up in a small town, my church community was incredibly important to me and our social fabric. We had a lot of different churches in our little community, one on every corner, we used to say. But, we did things on Sunday. We had blue laws. Anybody remember blue laws? We had blue laws. So nothing was open on Sundays because everybody went to church and then it was family. We had a network of community in excuse me. Turn the AC up one notch. And so we had that support system. If something happened, the community came together in support. Someone passed, or someone was going through a hard time. Baskets of food just show up on the porch. And I think today, with so many not having that, we're lost and we're looking. And so we see the self-help industry exploding. Tons of books, tons of seminars, tons of programs, online teaching and coaching, and all the things that are out there for us because we're looking for that sense of community. We have it here. We have it here. And that's our work in the world, is bringing this out to others. How many, show of hands, were introduced to science of mind by someone else? Majority of us. I was searching. I had a hole in my heart and I couldn't fill it. I was happy in everything else in my life. It was all going great. And my friend Denise introduced me to the Centers for Spiritual Living. And I felt like I was home. And that place inside of me filled up. And I became actively engaged. We laugh today. It's like, didn't see the ministry thing coming, but glad you found religious science of mind. So most of us are introduced. And as I mentioned earlier, we are having Bring a Friend Month next month. Think of the person that invited you and how grateful you are for that. And who can you pay that forward to in your life? To introduce someone to this community, to this teaching, to these uplifting, affirmative, positive ways of living and being in the world. Who can you introduce? Who can you pay that gift to? I opened up this morning by asking if you'd ever given up your good to receive your greater. And there's a story you probably heard about the monkey, that the scientist put a banana inside of a jar, and the jar's opening was just big enough for the monkey's hand. And the monkey, as anticipated, reached in the jar, grabbed the banana, and couldn't get it out with his fist closed, right? The thing was too small. So rather than let go of the good, the banana, he forewent his greatness of having two hands to maybe be able to turn the jar upside down and shake out the banana. But he trapped himself. He limited his freedom because he wouldn't let go of the good for the greater. Sometimes we treat for more, we treat for better, we treat for a healing. But are we willing to give up the story? Are we willing to give up the habit, the companionship, the paycheck? Are we willing to give those things up, that good, for our greater? Do we have an okay job with a steady paycheck, but we really want our own business? Sometimes that good is what's standing in the way of our great. So if you would like to grow in faith and learn to become more willing to give up the good for the great, to build that level of faith and trust, I invite you to sign up for Mindful Monday. You can sign up with the QR code in the lobby or online. Send me an email. We'll get you added to the list. And this comes out on Monday mornings, and it's just a summary of the talk and the practices and things that we do here that you can use throughout the week to apply this teaching to your life and to learn it more deeply. So our practicing the principles this week, I only have one for us. It is, I recommend you do it every day, and it's a deepening exercise, and it really is asking ourselves that question: what good am I allowing to block my great? Use your meditation and journaling time to reflect on your life and if or where your good is blocking your great. I want to close with a This is our book of the month, and we haven't talked a lot about it. Reverend Lee and I have used it a lot for our talks this month, but I want to read you just a brief passage and tell you a little story. The book is called The Miracle Club: How Thoughts Become Reality by Mitch Horowitz, and this is chapter 5, and it's titled How to Make a Miracle. And he says, this is the most important chapter in this book. Get your attention, right? He says, if you take nothing else from what I've written, act on this chapter. I have worked as a body, mind, spirit publisher, a historian and of alternative spirituality, and an individual seeker, sampling and struggling with many of the ideas of self-liberation and self-development. This time has convinced me of the existence of one deeply powerful force, which can be cultivated as a means of advancing toward a sense of personal completeness, meaning, and self-purpose. We're always using this force for good or ill. This force exerts a kind of gravitational pull, sometimes strong enough to flatten mountains of circumstance or erect new mountains, blocking our path to where we think we want to go. This force functions either intimately or on a macro scale as a catalyst for harmony or friction. It can deliver us to circumstances and events that surpass all conventional or natural expectation, which I define as a miracle. What is this overlooked energy? The power of one deeply felt wish. One finely honed, exclusively focused, and passionately felt desire. Something that feels to you like breath itself. Find this and you will discover a power like none other available to you. This concept was initially reached to me through the example of one of the most impactful thinkers of the past century, Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Wilson was in the hospital in 1934, recovering from yet another bout of alcoholism. And a guy named Ebby Thatcher came to visit. Ebby was sober at the time, came to visit, and he told him, he says, alcoholism requires a spiritual solution. Alcoholism requires a spiritual solution. He also introduced him to William James' writings and also Carl Jung's writings. When Bill got out of the hospital, he took that information and he created the 12-step program known as Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill remained sober for the rest of his life. Ebby did not. 2 years later, Ebby started drinking again and drank all the way through the end of his life. Lois was Bill's wife, and after Bill's passing, she wrote her memoirs about Bill and her experience with him. And in her memoir, she says, after those first 2 years, why did Ebby get drunk? It was he who gave Bill the philosophy that kept him sober. Why didn't it keep Ebby sober? He was sincere, I'm sure. Perhaps it was a difference in the degree of wanting sobriety. Bill wanted it with his whole soul. Ebby may have wanted it simply to keep out of trouble. Anytime that we seek to change, we should ask ourselves, do I seek this change in my life at my soul level? Or do I just want to stay out of trouble? What is your deeply held wish? So it is. It's your turn. Questions or comments? We covered a lot today. That was awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Lori. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned something that Ernest said, which was about exercising our freedom as long as it doesn't harm anyone or anything else. And that seems really right and easily to be agreed with. in the book Illusions, there's kind of this extreme little parable. Do you guys know that book, Illusions? Richard Bach. If you haven't ever read it, I highly recommend it. And so this teacher is teaching this other guy how to be the Messiah. Anyway, so this one little lesson he says is like, he sets up this whole story about, somebody coming in a dark alley, and he sets up the whole scene, and, and then he's going to jump him, and turns out he wants to suck his blood. It's a vampire. Well, he's going to refuse to let the vampire suck his blood. Right? And then the question is, well, doesn't that harm the vampire? He needs it to live. He needs that to stay alive. That's his food. So, kind of a funny and extreme story, but, in modern times, when we think about choices we make and things we do to take care of ourselves that maybe harm someone else because they want something different. So, what's up with that?
Okay. Yeah, right. Next question. Yeah, that the parable. Let's start there. We have to start with the assumption that vampires are inherently good. Well, we have to believe in them first. I don't. I think it's a story. So, um, the other part about self care for ourselves, and if it's causing harm to another, I don't think that's possible in the spiritual realm. Because if someone is doing something that is causing you harm and they think it's to their good, they're not on the same plane spiritually. Yeah, that's that. I still think that's if you're feeling like is it are you feeling threatened by that person wanting to violate those boundaries? Then that's your prerogative, and you're not in alignment on the spiritual plane, because all we talk about is in consciousness. And yes, we have to protect ourselves at the physical level, but in consciousness, someone that you're in alignment with is not going to try to hurt you, right? Yeah. So, huh? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you take care of yourself and they will take care of themselves. Those things that are attracted into our lives that cause us to put those boundaries up and things, when we put the boundary and then don't pay attention anymore, we take the energy away from that and they go away. But as long as we fight it and resist it and push against it and get upset about it and talk about it and tell the story and all that stuff, that energy is going to stay there and keep knocking at that boundary. And if not that particular person, then somebody or something else, until we heal that within ourselves and can turn away from it. Phew.
This is much easier. It's not a question so much as a comment. And you were talking about when Ernest was experiencing all the other religions in the world. And I can remember being 19 years old, and I was in Tel Aviv for the very first time with TWA. And I was going to go see all of these things in Tel Aviv. And I went to the Dome of the Rock where Muhammad ascended. I went to the Way of the Cross with Jesus. I went to the Wailing Wall, which was really sacred to the Jewish religion. And I was 19, and I really had no experience except my little Presbyterian, but I was open to it. And all the crew that I wanted to go with me had been there a million times and they weren't going. So I did all this up on a tour I had that experience that it was all one. No one told me it was one. I knew it was one. It was in my heart, and I realized that going to the Wailing Wall or the Garden of the Gethsemane or the Dome of the Rock with Mohammed, at 19, I had my awareness that there was one God and one thing, and I'll never forget that.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yay. All right, one more. Anybody else? Valerie. Valerie, who's off on a cruise.
This is my last week for 3 weeks, you guys. So I want to commend you. This was a wonderful, just circling back to where the roots come from. And it was awakening and informative. So that was really an awesome service today, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I never know how those will land. Sometimes people go, that's just old history stuff. But, it's good to know where we came from and why we do what we do, right? Yes.
It's really easy.
This would be the werewolf.
No, this one's really, really easy. And I don't know, maybe it's obvious, but I don't know. What is this little symbol about on the what is it? What's it about?
Our teaching symbol. She's asking about our teaching symbol. Ernest came up with this as a tool for teaching the creative process. And let's see if I can do this way. Okay, got a point. And what? Oh, look at Joe. How'd you find that? Wow, that's good. Just pull it right out. All right, so we got the circle, which is representative of spirit. That's the allness. There's nothing outside the circle, but as a teaching item, we drew a circle. That's all God. And then the top portion is indicative of God or the seed, the idea. The middle section is the soil that the seed is planted into, or the law, the mental process, the receptive element. And the bottom part is your manifestation, the physical form. So it goes from idea or thought through the law into form. The V is representative of spirit coming into the physical. Spirit coming into the physical, creation coming into the physical realm. So that's basically the teaching symbol. Valerie. He's wrong. No.
He said turn it upside down, and when he said that, I got all mixed. I have this one, like Clements, but he told me to turn it upside down, and I'm going, I don't get it.
To what purpose?
It's how it actually works. And it's like the seed, the soil,
The plant, the soil, the seed. I'll have to take that up with him when he gets back. I'm not sure what that one is. Reverend Lee, we need to talk. Okay. All right. Okay.
I have kind of a thought on that. Maybe a lot of folks, myself included, sometimes function from the logical, and the logical on my brain says that it makes more sense to be right side up because we're used to seeing the plant, which is above the soil, and below that is the growth, and below that is the seed. So I wonder if maybe that's a tool he was trying to use to make it make more sense to a logical brain that we can then convert it back into a metaphysical representation.
Yeah, I think I know where he's going with it. He's going with what we focus on is what we want, which is the manifestation. So that's where we start. We focus on the bloom that we want to experience, and then we move ourselves back into cause. Cause being the seed or the idea or so forth. So that's what he's talking about. When you turn it upside down, we focus on what, and then we move ourselves back into the realization of the cause of that being spirit. Rightly? All right. Shall we pray? Thank you all for being here. You're a lot of fun. I appreciate you. All right. So as we go within, we recognize that there is one power, one presence, one life, and that life is God. It is the source. It is the universal presence. It is the universal energy. It is love and peace and joy and harmony, balance. And all of that infinite love that is beyond imagining is right here. And it is in, through, and as me, as an expression of it, uniquely made manifest of that love. As they say, God thought us into creation. So I know that is the truth of each and every one gathered here today, in the room, online, or someone listening later. For we're all connected in this one. This one life is our life now. There is no time or space separation. We are all one in this moment and this moment and this. And so knowing that, I speak my word for and about each one of us, knowing that we are centers for spiritual living. We are Scottsdale Center for Spiritual Living. And that we live as representations of spirit. As spirit lives, moves, and has its being through each and every one of us in our lives. And we express spirit in each and every moment, each and every thought, each and every breath. And so as we do that, I know that each of us is like a pebble in a pond, and those ripples go out from our life, touching all of those around us, our family, our friends, those we meet, strangers on the street, that we connect with them. And we see the God presence in them. They see our light. We are connected in oneness. We are one. And that is our work in the world, is bringing more kindness, more generosity, more love to our planet in each and every interaction that we have. I know for anyone that has anything on their heart today that they seek prayer around, as they lift that into the consciousness of this prayer, that we as a community hold them in our love and in our light, knowing the manifestation of that desire, whether it is clarity, a healing, a relationship, love, health, joy, whatever it might be. We know that it is done. It is done. And so it is with a grateful heart, filled with joy and thanksgiving, that I release this prayer into the action of law, knowing that it's already done in the mind of God, and we just simply await its manifestation. It is done now, and we affirm together, and so it is.